Thank you for joining us once again, and welcome to the webinar, Avoiding the Pitfalls of Cloud HPC Management, with special guest from Intersect 360 Research. My name is Jolie Hales. I'm with Rescale, and I will be your moderator today. We also wanted to make you aware of the Rescale Solutions Live webinar series, where we go into depth on how to run various popular softwares on Rescale, everything from ANSYS to MSC to Converge software, and then some. We pretty much cover it all. So you're welcome to join us for any of those. You can find more information about those webinars on rescale.com or on any of our social media channels. And you can also find many of our webinar recordings from the past on our YouTube channel if you search for Rescale. So wanted to make you aware of that. And all right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So let's take a look at our agenda today. So we'll go ahead and start with these introductions, and then we'll jump right into our Intersect 360 analyst discussion about the state of cloud HPC. And then we'll see how to avoid the pitfalls of HPC management through Rescale Insight, which is kind of exciting. And that will include a live demo. And then we'll conclude this webinar with a Q&A. So stay tuned to see those questions answered. We have a few presenters lined up for today. So first, we'll have a discussion featuring our special guest, Addison Snell, the man, the myth, the legend. A little about Addison. He is the CEO of Intersect 360 Research, and he's a veteran of the high-performance computing industry. Anybody familiar with HPC knows Addison's name. He launched the company in 2007 as Tabor Research, a division of Tabor Communications, and he served as that company's VP and GM until he and his partner, Christopher Willard, PhD, acquired Tabor Research in 2009. And during his tenure, Addison has established Intersect 360 Research as a premier source of market information, analysis, and consulting. He was named one of 2010's People to Watch by HPC Wire. Snell was previously an HPC industry analyst for IDC, where he was well known among industry stakeholders. And prior to IDC, he gained recognition as a marketing leader and spokesperson for SGI's supercomputing products and strategy. He's good talking to people, as you'll see here. Addison holds a master's degree from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University and a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. And we are so excited to have him here with us today. And Addison will be interviewed by Shawn Hansen, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Rescale. A little about Shawn. Before joining Rescale, he was the CMO at HEAP and also the CCO at Mixpanel, in addition to holding senior leadership roles at Microsoft and Cisco Systems. He has a Bachelor's of Arts in Humanities from Brigham Young University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. On a personal note, Shawn enjoys music with his family and reading great literature and strategy books. And you should see his family. What a beautiful family they really are. And then after the discussion with Shawn and Addison, we'll turn the time over to Peter Liu, who will walk us through how to avoid the pitfalls of cloud HPC through Rescale Insights. And a little about Peter. Peter leads the solutions engineering team at Rescale, and he's responsible for the technical pre-sales and customer success engineering. He has more than 10 years of leadership experience at the intersection of HPC, cloud, and engineering simulations. And he has a bachelor's, master's, and PhD degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan, with an extensive background in computational fluid dynamics, multidisciplinary design optimization, and cloud architecture. Prior to joining Rescale, he has led the CFD applications team at Comsol to help engineers accelerate innovation with multi-physics simulations. And then the last picture here is me. And again, I'm Jolie Hales. I'll be your moderator, and I will spare you my biography. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. At this time, Shawn Hansen, I will turn the time over to you and Addison to talk about the state of the cloud HPC industry. Let me get your cameras going here, guys. Go gadget cameras and microphones coming in. Okay, the transitions are fun. There we go. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Jolie. And welcome to all of you joining us today. We see many of you joining from around the world, and we're grateful for the attendance. Addison, it's great to see you again, and excited about today's topic, and particularly learning a little bit about what you've seen happen in the industry in the last year. maybe just a little bit of introductions, Addison, if that would be okay. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you landed in the HPC industry.
Yeah, sure. Great to see you again, Shawn, and Jolie. Thanks for the introduction. Also, Jolie already gave a lot of my background, but how I got into the HPC industry, like a lot of careers, happened largely by accident. I wasn't looking for supercomputing. I don't have an engineering background. I was coming out of business school in the late 90s, and of course, the Silicon Valley was just booming then. I knew I wanted to get a job in tech. Silicon Graphics was a high-flying company at the time and was hiring a lot of us, and that was my entry into high-performance computing. I'd worked with some high-tech companies before, but I was really just looking for a product marketing or product management job, and got into SGI doing those roles for our Origin and eventually Altix servers and supercomputers. That was my entree to HPC. I did that for about 6.5 years before becoming an analyst, then with the high performance computing team at IDC in late 2003. I started there just before the supercomputing conference in 2003. I stayed at IDC until we started Tabor Research as a division of Tabor Communications at the beginning of 2007, and I've been an analyst in this industry ever since.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about Intersect 360 and the kind of things we might learn from your company.
Well, sure. We're analysts in this industry, and we do the things that analysts do: market sizing, forecasting, trend analysis, lots of surveys. I've got a weekly podcast called This Week in HPC that people might have heard. But more importantly, we've really been focusing on what we call accurate market intelligence for high performance computing. When we started at Tabor Research, which was then a division of Tabor Communication, having a partnership with the publication side, particularly HPC Wire, gave us access to the best, really the best end user and reader lists in the industry. And that gave us the opportunity to do a lot of demand side research and really challenge a lot of assumptions of what we thought we knew about the high performance computing market. And a lot of our market research does just that. It can be easy and I'll say even profitable to do market research, to just tell people what we think is true or what people want to hear. But what we found is when we really dig at the hard research and challenge our assumptions, we can learn a lot of really surprising things. And that's been our goal, is to build more accurate market models and trends and give the best possible advice to our clients in this space, even if it's not what people are expected or what they wanted to hear.
We have a lot of people on the call today who are probably very interested in understanding how has COVID and some of the unusual times we live in affected the market. At the beginning of the year at the Big Compute Conference, you reported that the cloud HPC market would see sizable growth in 2020. And then when COVID hit, you increased those forecasts. Could you tell us a little bit about what you see happening in the market that indicates a more rapid migration to the cloud, and maybe what some of the most recent viewpoints are?
Yeah, and this is an important question, and I'll spend maybe an extra minute on this because it's a more complicated market forecasting year than we've seen in the time that I've been an analyst, because we're in the middle of a recession that we see coming here. And with respect, we did put out pre-announced guidance back in March to all of our clients about this upcoming change in our forecast. We've now released complete data to our clients, and you'll see a press release from us and an upcoming webinar for the industry very soon. The press release should come out this week on some of the top level announcements about the forecast. Now, in terms of growth of cloud, cloud has been in a high growth mode, particularly since 2017. We really saw it kick into that double-digit growth mode, and that's regardless of COVID. We've been forecasting cloud at more or less around 20% compound annual growth rate, varying a little bit year to year, and that's staying on that line throughout the forecast period, regardless of COVID. Now we have to look at what happens with COVID-19 and the dramatic effect that's going to have economically in the market, regardless of the medical and effect that it's having on lives. Our role as analysts is to look at the economic effect. And we've done that predominantly by vertical market and looking at what things are going to be relatively stable, like government research and biosciences, pharma. We're going to continue to see investment even through the recession, and what other areas like like automotive and aerospace, engineering, energy, retail, that are going to see a big decline. Now, when that happens, it hits on-premise acquisitions disproportionately to everything else, because if I have a cut to my HPC budget, let's just take a number. Let's say I have to take a 10% cut to my budget. Well, the primary thing I want to do is protect existing operations. So I'll keep my existing systems, my power, my cooling, ideally my people. I'd rather not lay anything off. And the things that I can postpone will be things like major acquisitions, right? So where cloud really, so that has two things. First, before I get to cloud, is what we'll see is a big regression in the market in 2020, but to the extent that a lot of those purchases are delayed rather than canceled, a lot of them will come back in 2021, presuming we get past the economic effects of COVID-19. Now, if things extend into 2021, all bets are off, and there's a lot of risk in the forecast based on that. But what we're really forecasting now is a dip in 2020 market-wide, followed by a spike in 2021, and continued oscillation before things really level out toward the end of the forecast period. Now, for cloud really does the opposite. Because if I start delaying my existing on-premise purchases, which are going to be disproportionately affected, cloud has the ability to bridge that gap, and I can start filling in needs and projects with cloud computing. So where we were already forecasting that growth, like I said before, around 20% year over year with cloud, in 2020, we should see a big spike above that mark, and then it'll be relatively flat into 2021, see another boom in 2022, and then start leveling out again, but still in that high growth mode for cloud. But whereas other areas will see dips below the previous forecast, cloud will see spikes above the previous forecast, and that's because cloud deals well with uncertainty. When I don't know what's coming, I tend to use more cloud. Cloud is very flexible for those kinds of things, and what COVID-19 is giving us is certainly a lot of uncertainty.
Tell us a little bit more about the main benefits that you see driving companies to migrate their workloads to the cloud. I'm curious if you see those, and which benefits you see as being most sticky during these moments of flexibility, as you said.
Yeah, and this is an important point because we've been talking about cloud and HPC for more than 10 years now, and a lot of the early discussion around cloud was built around this premise that cloud is just sort of magically and automatically cheaper. And I think we know that, especially for HPC, in most cases that's not true. The real question is, where do we see a big benefit? The early benefits of cloud have been areas where we see really bursty workloads, or people who don't have their own on-premise infrastructure and they want to start the uptake. That's where the early growth in cloud has been. And now we're starting to find benefits in cloud beyond that, particularly as a premium service for where do I want to test new workloads? Where do I want to test new technologies? Where do I need flexibility in my workloads or in my workforce? Where do I need data migratability? There are a lot of areas where cloud is a really worthwhile model for workflow that really transcend the notion of, oh, it's just going to be cheaper. Well, I've got a lot of choices around my infrastructure, and there are a lot of potential benefits that cloud can deliver there.
Are there particular industries where you see faster adoption of cloud HPC? And I'm curious about why.
Well, right now they're all going pretty fast. Earlier in cloud adoption, the fastest ones were in the public sector, particularly with academia. That was where it was easiest to have individual researchers who had control of their own data. They weren't working with licensed code. Things tend to be open sourced, or maybe scripts that they wrote themselves. And you could do a discrete bit of workload, lift it up to the cloud, and not worry about access to other resources. The more recent growth has been across multiple commercial vertical markets, and we've been seeing it in finance. We've been seeing it in manufacturing. We've even been seeing it in oil and gas, which I would have thought would be one of the last commercial vertical markets to get there due to the data sizes, the size of those data volumes, I thought would really hold it back. And the fact that oil and gas really tends toward the supercomputing end of the spectrum versus the entry-level side of the spectrum. But even oil and gas, we've seen a lot of migration, and a lot of that has had to do with machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is a very cloud-friendly workload.
As you talk to people, I'm sure some have still expressed hesitancy to move to the cloud. What concerns have people expressed, and why do you think there's some resistance?
Well, when we talk about fear of moving to cloud, not everyone who holds back from moving to cloud has to do with fear. A lot of it is just economic analysis and saying, yeah, I'm looking at it. I've got my on-premise systems. We're pretty good at running them here, and I think we're better off staying on-premise. So not everyone who doesn't fly is because they're afraid of flying. Now, that said, there are people who are afraid of flying, and we do see people who still have a fear of cloud. Early on, a lot of that had to do with security, and we'll talk about that topic a little more in this interview, I think. But if I really had to get down to it, I think if I were advising people around cloud right now, I think the stickiness is a specialty around security, and going beyond security is the notion of data sovereignty, which has to do with data access, data control, data ownership, data stewardship, data migration. All of these concepts around data and how I maintain data sovereignty, I think is a real issue, and I think is going to be a key topic of conversation, particularly around cloud, broader than HPC, over the course of the next several years.
Right. As you talk to customers around data sovereignty, they often bring up the idea of multi-cloud and being able to have control over their own destiny. When would you recommend that a company pursue a multi-cloud rather than a single cloud engagement?
Yeah, I don't know that I would necessarily recommend one over another. We're not in the recommendation business, but it is an important evaluation, and evaluating one cloud vendor versus another and whether to use multiple cloud vendors is tantamount to being similar to evaluating on-premise vendors. And people have always looked at, well, gee, should I have all IBM or all Dell or all HPE, or do I mix between the different vendors? And I just kind of picked some off the top of my head in terms of people would talk about the benefits of having a common ecosystem versus the fear of vendor lock-in. And I think cloud really does that. Is there an advantage or disadvantage to having all of my data and all of my workloads in, say, Azure or AWS or GCP, or do I fear that because all my data is in one place? And then how does that relate in a hybrid cloud environment? Because most of these are hybrid clouds to on-premise. Now, if you are going to consider multi-cloud, you need to really talk about the federation of the clouds, the data migratability, and also the migratability of application licenses becomes really important. Not just how do I account for licenses in one cloud, but if I have a site license or tokens, are those migrating across clouds in a way that I feel like I'm managing my software in the most economically efficient way?
Yeah, I see there's a number of IT leaders and CXOs on the line today. To ensure that they can get their most out of HPC installations in the cloud, what does an IT leader need to keep an eye on?
Well, for HPC, the watchword has always been evolution. I mean, as my business partner likes to say, in enterprise compute, this is Chris Willard, our chief research officer throughout the history of our company. He always said in enterprise computing, once you've got something working, for heaven's sakes, don't touch it. Whereas in HPC, once something was working, it's no longer interesting. You tear it down and you do the next thing. You don't need to design the same bridge twice. You design the next harder bridge. And that's always been true in high performance computing and supercomputing. You solve one problem, it's done, you move on to the next problem. And science is like that. It continues to evolve from a workload standpoint. You move on to the next problem, the next problem, the next problem. And now we've really gone into a hyper extension of that, because not only do we have the steady advancement of scientific and engineering or technical workloads, but we've brought in big data, data science, and analytics as a new set of workloads. And then we've brought in machine learning and artificial intelligence as a new set of workloads. So we've had a dramatic expansion in the types of workloads that people are encompassing. We've also had a dramatic expansion on the supply side, or the technology side, of the types of technologies that are brought into play. Look at the diversity of the diaspora of processing technologies that are available now with not only Intel and AMD in the x86 world, but looking at GPUs and FPGAs and ARM processors. You have different interconnect options, you have different storage options. So we now have to match this broad set of workloads on one hand to a broad set of technologies on the other hand, and how much I keep on-premise versus in the cloud winds up being another variable in terms of all this. And what an IT leader really needs to keep their eye on is how that evolves. Interestingly, I think cloud has a real role to play in helping that transition, not making it more complicated, because it provides an option for forward-looking technologies on a utility basis.
So let's talk a little bit about complexity. You talk about the complexity of technology, of people, of on-premise versus cloud. As these systems become more scaled and become more complex to serve maybe a more distributed global audience and different business units, what kinds of controls do you think HPC and IT leaders will need?
Yeah, that's really an extension. It's a great question, and it's an extension of how HPC has evolved prior to cloud, which is as we moved from really what were self-contained supercomputers to clusters and grids. There was a real evolution of the middleware space that had to take place there, where you take a look at something as simple as system accounting, and that had to change in terms of what does a system administrator do, and how do I handle multiple resources, especially across a geographically disperse set of HPC resources. And now that's really just got to evolve to encompass cloud. And in fact, a lot of the growth that we saw starting from 2017 had to do with the evolution of that space, where it's now easier to get middleware at an HPC level that looks at cloud resources as an extension of my HPC pool and incorporates that such that I can monitor workloads across on-premise and cloud. I think it's really going to be an ongoing evolution there. I think the other part of the evolution that really helped cloud evolve was the maturation of software licensing to incorporate cloud resources in a friendly way that really allowed the migration of software to cloud in a way that made economic sense. And that's going to happen as more people continue to incorporate cloud in what they're doing. We'll see the maturation of this middleware space in a way that helps people adopt cloud as part of what they're doing.
You talked about managing software licenses in the cloud as being a challenge. Could you talk a little bit more about what options are available to let HPC managers maximize how they utilize software licenses?
Well, that's going to really vary depending on the software application. We've surveyed this over time, and any software provider would say, yeah, sure, we have utility pricing mechanisms. The goal there is what does that licensing look like such that the end user can feel like they've got the ability to migrate and they're not paying some kind of penalty for the short-term scalability of cloud licensing. But the different myriad licensing mechanisms really go well beyond our ability to list them in an interview. It's contact a software provider near you for how to best migrate your applications to the cloud.
Let's talk a little bit more about other kinds of evolution. How do you see cloud HPC security evolving, and do you feel it's secure enough?
Well, secure enough is kind of a watchword there, because we're in the realm of COVID-19. Is going to the grocery store safe enough? People will say yes, it's safe. Other people will say no, it's not safe. And well, if you wear a mask, it's okay, and stay 6 feet away from each other. Everyone's going to have their different thresholds, and that go back to what I said about fear of flying. There are people who are afraid to fly. Is the airplane safe enough? Well, for most people it is, right? And people will go and say, yes, it's safe. Does that mean there's never a plane crash? There are going to be security issues for any company on premise or in the cloud. I think for the majority of organizations out there, yeah, they're adopting cloud. I remember when we had the same conversations around the internet. And would you want to trust your business to the internet? Is the internet safe enough? those were real conversations that companies had in the 1990s, and there's an evolution there. Now, there are things like compliance certifications that vary by industry, and those will vary company to company, and you can get those, and I think that helps people feel a little bit better. I think the real thing is you look at what happened with the internet, and people today would say, I can't imagine not having the internet available to my company because it provides too much utility. And you know, is there any risk in using the internet? Sure, there are risks, but I'm going to be on it because the utility is certainly there.
Thank you. I guess last question of the evening, and I'm very curious. You mentioned a couple of different trends that you see happening, ranging from access to more flexibility, more variety of hardware, changing and evolving security and application variety and needs. If you were to look forward 5 years and just imagine a landscape that the CIO or the CXO has to prepare for and has to prepare their organization for, could you just describe what that looks like and maybe your vision for the future? And that's our last question of the evening.
Well, my vision for the future, particularly as is germane to this topic, is what users really need is an ability to better match new technologies to new workloads in a way that makes that investment easier. And cloud has a real role to play here. What I talked about before is it's not just that cloud is going to be automatically cheaper. Where does it make sense from an economic standpoint or a utility standpoint? And here's a chance for cloud as a role in HPC to play a real value add, because within the scope of my cloud instances, I can pretty efficiently test evolving workloads against a very wide range of different instance types to see what's going to work for me going forward. And that's not to say I'm going to leave everything in cloud for all time, but if I can say, look, here's 60% of my workloads that do really well on a particular instance type, and I've evaluated that in the cloud, I can then make an on-premise investment, do a lot of stuff in-house on that. But then these other things that require special resources, maybe I don't want to buy those, I can leave those in the cloud. I think you're going to see that kind of evaluation, and cloud can play a real value add here in being a test bed for future-looking technologies and future-looking workloads. I think when we start using phrases like cloud first, that's what that's going to mean to me in an HPC context, is using cloud out into the future in terms of what do I want things to look like rolling forward, use it as a way to do real planning, and then it will continue to be part of my workloads going forward. I don't see in the 5-year or even the 10-year horizon all of HPC is going to lift and shift to the cloud. I don't think that's the most efficient thing, but I think that the HPC community will get a lot more intelligent about where cloud belongs in a way that's more inclusive than just saying, oh, here's a bursty workload. I think there is a real cloud value add there, particularly in this forward-looking scenario.
Thank you. Choice, flexibility, control, all areas of the industry is evolving. Thank you so much. Addison, I really appreciate your time today. Any final comments, any final thoughts for us?
Well, I think Rescale has been doing an excellent job in this space. Another part of the growth in cloud has been that there are companies like Rescale who can really help manage the transition of HPC to cloud. That service is really worthwhile for the HPC user community. I appreciate you having me here today.
Great, thank you, both of you. And it looks like we already have some good questions trickling in, so we'll hang on to those for the end of the webinar. Appreciate your time, Shawn, Addison. Thank you for being with us once again. And now I will go ahead and turn the presentation over to Peter.
All right, thank you, Julie. So it's great to be here. At Rescale, we spend a lot of time helping our customer transition HPC workload to the cloud. And as part of our onboarding process, we have talked to hundreds of HPC users, system admins, IT leaders, to really understand what are the challenges they're facing today and see how we can help them to solve those challenges. Now, most of the challenges we hear about is probably pretty common, something you would expect, something like we want a better performance of our hardware, or we want a faster time to solution, or we want access to more computation resource. However, there's quite a few items that we heard about that is interesting that we actually didn't expect. One of the things that we often hear some of our customers say is that I really want to understand what is our HPC users' actual usage. And actually, Addison talked a little bit about early in the session. You would have thought this is a quite straightforward problem, but in fact, because the complexity of HPC stack, and it's actually very, very challenging to understand exact usage, and particularly if you actually want to get insights into those exact usage in real time. And one of the customer we have talked to, they actually hire external consultant and purchase middleware just to able to collect all the scheduler log from each of the asset they have and combine them into some report so they can actually see the usage. And we really hope this shouldn't be that complex in order to get some insights into the actual HPC usage. Another thing we heard our customers say is that I want to ensure my users are following the HPC best practices. And if you run any kind of simulation, you will know that not all models scale equally. So if you want to run 10 times faster, it doesn't mean that you can just apply 10 times more hardware or more cores. So there's certain limit how well you can scale, and there's certain matching you can do to ensure you're running the simulation in the most efficient way. Now, one of the challenges we see our customers saying is that they often see their users are not actually using the best practices, which is many engineers are not really trained HPC. They're experts of physics and understanding the design. But when it comes to HPC, they may just simply applying more cores than actually would efficiently utilize the resource. So they're looking for ways to help provide intelligent recommendations to the user when they set up a job. Then they're already being recommended on the platform, knowing what is the best hardware to run and what is the most efficient way to run their model based on the setup they have. The Rescale Help platform really helped to get to the experience they need. So I want to take a step back and share what a Rescale platform is really about. Now, at Rescale, we create a platform to connect with all the different major cloud providers, but at the same time, we provide a turnkey solution to ensure all the different hardware, all the different software applications is configured, ready to go for the engineers and scientists to run their simulation. So they will have access to an easy-to-use SaaS platform and allow them to log on to the platform and then get their job set up without the need to worry about anything like scripting, setting up scheduler, setting up the application, configuring, compiling. All these things are taken care of behind the hood. And all they need to do is to bring the model they have and get their job running so they can focus on their design, focus on what their mission is. And another thing, one of the things we hear our customers say is that they actually want to, this is actually surprising, that they want to make the most use of their HPC applications. Now, this is, actually, Addison talked about it a little bit, actually, is that if you look at the total cost of a simulation, the application license is actually represent the bulk up part of the cost, actually much more than the HPC hardware, underlying hardware. So if the organization is not making the most use of their HPC license, they're actually wasting a lot of money. So in order to do that, they want to able to not only just maximize the utilization of the license, but also potentially actually get the simulation running faster by applying the most appropriate hardware so that their license can be freed up for the next user or next applications. And in the end, you're actually getting more value out of your application license in the end. So just to summarize some of the common challenges we see our customer facing, financial controls. They want to make sure they keep tracking of the resource consumption. They're not surprised by a large bill at the end of the month. They want to make sure they have security access compliance so that they're not putting a lot of whole compliance team worry about where the data is and how to migrate those data. And they have an easy to use portal able to actually view the compliance posture around their usage. They want to make sure they make the most use of a software license and ensure that software license is accessible globally across a distributed workforce. And they want to ensure the users is follow the HPC best practices and making sure they're using the most optimal hardware architecture. And finally, managing a global team, and particularly with COVID situation, many more organizations now has a widely distributed workforce that want to access and get their job done around HPC from anywhere in the world which then managing a distributed team on accessing a central resource become actually quite challenging. So our team has spent a lot of effort to help our customers solve those challenges. And I'm incredibly excited to introduce you to Rescale Insight, which is a new product line that we developed to help you manage HPC like a business. So you can get all the insight of financial control, security, software, infrastructure, and manage your team within a cloud-based environment to make it very, very easy to use, very, very accessible. Now, there's no better way to show you how the product looks like just to show you a live demo of what the platform looks like. So let me move on to the screen here. All right, so I want to start kind of roll back a little bit. Some of you may not completely familiar with Rescale platform. So we mentioned earlier, Rescale is a SaaS platform that allows you access to the computational resource. From a user perspective, we developed the platform to make it extremely easy to use. So if you want to run HPC simulation, you go to rescale.com, log into the platform, and you'll be able to access to the computation resource available to you. So this is my account. So you can see I have a number of jobs I've run in the past and a number of jobs I'm currently running. So as a user, I can quickly set up a job. I can pick which input file I want to use, which application I like to use, what license option I like to use. And then finally, we actually recommend what hardware option that you like to use to make the most use of your application. In the same time, you can monitor results. So in this case, I can see the status of my job, how it is running. I can look at the intermediate results, such as in this case, I'm in aerospace background, so I always like to use an airplane example. Looking at the contour plot of an airplane, looking at the convergence history, just to making sure my model is converging correctly. Now, those are all great from a user perspective. So what Rescale Insight is about is for the system admins and IT leaders, engineering managers, to making sure the users is actually make the most use of these resources and help manage the user base. So we have a complete separate backend for system admins and IT leaders to access and manage their HPC environment. So in this case, this is a demo account. You can see an organization level overview. So in this case, I have 4 workspaces created. Each workspace is a separate environment for a particular group of users. So that could be a business unit that has a different needs on the HPC requirements. Within the workspace, you can have different projects and help you able to build against a particular workload that you work with. You can have a number of different software enabled in a turnkey manner. And all the different hardware options available to you as well. And in this case, we have 81 members accessing to the Rescale platform and managing the user in a quick, easy way to a quick snapshot of the environment. Now, there's a couple of ways we want to look at it. One is we want to make sure there's transparency and accountability in terms of the consumption. So in this case, let's go to the economic dashboard. So this is one of the dashboard. It's updating in real time to help you see the consumption within your organization. So in this case, you can see there's a number of different projects being created within the organization. And there's a number of users, a number of jobs being run. And you can quickly see allocate a budget for a particular project and quickly see in real time the budget consumption. And in this particular case, Redstone project is a little bit overage. So you can see the overage as well. And all those data is actually completely tracked. And you can actually look back to a particular, let's see, find a month here. Find a particular month and look at the consumption, historical consumption of each month. So not only you can see this real time, but just seeing it doesn't help. So you also want to add some control in place. So you can define the budget. For example, let's go in here. So you can make changes to the budget, allocate different type of budget. It can be monthly, it could be one time. Let's give a try. So let's say I want to allocate a new budget. All right, and you can define budget in different levels. So workspace level, member level, or down to the project level. Let's say we want to, Jolene, here we go. So I know she's working on some very cool stuff. So let's give her a high budget and submit. All right, now we have a budget created for her. And let's create one more member. I know Shawn just come back from his vacation, so I don't think he's gonna run a lot of stuff. So let's put $500 for Shawn for the budget. So not only you have control on the organization level, you can even granularly all the way down to individual user to assign a particular budget for their usage. So, and I also want to share with you the utilization dashboard. So sometimes you just want to have a very quick snapshot of your consumption across the organization. So in this case, you can look at how many cores you have been using historically, and what are the hardware being used across organization, and what are the storage, transfer, and software charges has incurred within the organization. Another challenge we see our customer want to see is make sure they have security compliance within the different geographic regions and within the type of data they're working with. So in those cases, we have a security dashboard. And this is pretty cool. So you can actually see your user base, where they're logging, and ensure there's no location that may surprise you in terms of the access to the Rescale platform and to the HPC resources. You can see the logging attempts and who got locked out if they somehow forgot the password. But also you can see the different control you actually put in place. So we can integrate with single sign-on with your organization login credential, but you can also set things like password policy, enable a multi-factor authentications, and ensure you are meeting the compliance standard you have. Many of our customers actually also enable IP access rules so that you can set a CIDR range that only allow user accessing either through some kind of VPN to the corporate network or within the IP range of your corporate addresses so that you access the Rescale platform. All right, so these are the dashboards, give you a very quick overview of the different platform, different compliance standards, different utilization, controls, and budget in place. There's certainly a lot more details we can go through. So you can create new workspaces, invite new members. You can also look at different audit logs so that you can actually see who is accessing from what addresses or the failed logins, successful logins. Data is also important, so you want to ensure the data transfer, that no data is actually leaving without your tracing. So this here show you the different data transfer log. And again, we talk about the multi-factor authentications, the password policy, as well as single sign-on that you can turn on the account. All right. So in summary, hopefully you can quickly see that with Rescale Insight, we're providing the level of financial controls, really help you have a robust control and reporting across your different HPC assets. And you can add flexible billing, you can have budget control and management. And as an admin, you'll be alerted if any of the budget is approaching the 100%, and ensure that you always keep tab on the consumption of HPC. We help you manage the security and access control. So the tools help you to invite users, set user into different user groups, making sure you set up the access policy, such as integrating with single sign-on or multi-factor authentications, and ensure you comply with the security standard of your organization. We make sure you make the best use of your software license. Not only you have insights into what applications being used, how many licenses being used, but also we help you queue the license, queue the job based on maximize utilization of the license. And also you can access to different licensing mechanisms such as on-demand or utilization-based license model to ensure you get the most value of the application license. We help your users to make the best use of infrastructure underneath. So when a user submit a job, we provide recommendation what is the most optimal way of running the job in terms of hardware. And you can even, as admin, set constraints so that if you know this group of user only run high memory nodes, so there's no needs to provide any other type of resource available. So you can really lock things down so that a particular user group only able to run with the architecture that you have vetted and controlled. We allow you to define workspace so that you can manage group effectively. So the workspace can be for different business units and have dedicated control and billing mechanism. And you can even dedicate the controls to admins of a particular business units so that they can have their own control of environment. But at the same time, at the organization level, you can still view the different utilization and have the high level control in place. So with that, we'll wrap up this particular section around Rescale Insight, and I'll turn over to Jolene for any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter. And I appreciate the high budget on my project. I know Shawn is pretty jealous of that. Nice to see. We do have some questions that have been trickling in here. Again, just a reminder, if you do have a question for any of our panelists, feel free to write it down in the question window. Don't be shy. We are happy to answer those. I have one here. This is a solid question from Rick. He says, I have a Dell infrastructure running bright. We are academic with a lot of grant funding. How can I use Rescale in the cloud and either freeze or reduce my on-prem infrastructure using Rescale for apps and things like Outposts from AWS? It seems we could push storage to the cloud and eliminate bright licenses by using the new tools. I need to contain my infrastructure costs while being able to satisfy my grants when I get them with big impact computing. Peter, I think this one's for you.
Yeah, I can take that. That's a really excellent question. So, and that's actually a very common use case we see our customer ask about. So, yes, so you can actually have full control of not only just the cloud asset, but also your local asset as well. So if we do a hybrid integration with the particular compute resources you're using. And so Rescale will act as a control plan on the cloud to allow you to determine how much consumption each of your maybe research group or each of your student or researcher can use. And you can assign budget. And not only that, you can also define projects. In your case, the project can be each grant or each of the research topic you're working with. So when your user submit a job, they can choose which particular project they're running. And then in the end, you can have a real-time update on how much consumption is being used on that particular project. And you can determine the consumption directly from the control plan on the cloud for not only just your any cloud usage on all the cloud provider like AWS, Azure, GCP, but also your local asset as well for hybrid integration.
Thank you, Peter. Another question for you, it looks like here from Addison says, can we deploy Rescale in on-prem? Also, will it support multi-tenant?
So Rescale is born on the cloud. Our control plan, in a way, the Rescale platform itself lives on the cloud. So we do support a on-prem integration. What that means is that Rescale able to talk to your on-prem asset to help control or deploy jobs onto the asset. But Rescale platform itself is a SaaS-based platform, which you get the benefit of real-time updates and all the control pieces in place. So you can we also support multi-tenant. So in the case, there's two modes of operating. We can work with your own tenant if you have a cloud provider tenant that you already defined, and we can integrate into your tenant to deploy resources onto your cloud environment that you have. We also offer a fully managed environment as well. If you don't want to have agreement with each different cloud providers, Rescale is a turnkey solution. So you don't need to worry about negotiating and getting any kind of agreement in place. You can use Rescale platform right away. And behind the hood, we work with all our different cloud providers partner to ensure you have the resource you need, all directly from coming through the Rescale platform.
And there's a follow-up to the same question, Peter. He says, I work in a DC. Is there a way we shall deploy in our DC and resell multi-tenants to local customers?
So that's probably a longer conversation. We do have a more of a OEM portal where we can work with you to provide a Rescale platform for your customers. So we work with a lot of system integrators so that they can have a Rescale-like or Rescale experience, but in a multi-tenant environment for each of their customers. So maybe a short way of answer is yes, we do have a partner portal to allow you to work with your customer and provide Rescale HPC environment to them.
Great, just a follow-up statement. In UAE, large enterprise won't go to cloud mostly, hence finding a way to deploy Rescale locally and see how we can work together. Please get in touch for further discussion. Thank you, Marita-san. We will get in touch with you. Oh, another question's popped in here. This one is from Prishna. Says most of our users' data is export controlled. Do you support GovCloud?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have lots of government contractors and aerospace firms where their data is not only the data is export controlled, but also the application they use is export controlled. So Rescale actually has a dedicated separate platform that lives on the GovCloud, so that when you need to access it, we ensure that you are a US person that have the right privilege to access the platform. And behind the hood, we integrate it with all the different GovCloud environment, so that ensure we have ITAR compliance around the data, around the application we use. And then Rescale also, we went through a lot of different certifications, including ITAR compliance, all the way down to HIPAA and FedRAMP, and ensure that you have the compliance standard you need for the application that you run with.
Fabulous. A couple more questions have trickled in here. This one's from Mohammed. Is it possible to limit our user access to Rescale to only our corporate network?
Yeah, great question. So yes, so one of the things, actually, let me scroll over here. So one of the things that you see we show earlier is the access control part. So on the security dashboard, you will see the IP access rules, where you can actually define a CIDR range, so that let's say the CIDR range is just your corporate IP addresses network, and that way only user logging in from those IP ranges can access to the Rescale platform, and they will have a login denied if they come access from anywhere else in the world coming into more of their IP ranges. So.
Great. That looks like all of them. Oh, nope, we just got one more. This one's from Carlos. Which cloud provider does Rescale Insight support to show the usage on the platform?
Yeah, great question. So Rescale is cloud agnostic. So we work with all the major cloud providers. And on a Rescale Insight, it doesn't matter which cloud provider, and all the core types, all the HPC resources will show up equally. Depends on which of the resources your user is actually using behind the hood. At Rescale, we work with all the major cloud provider, AWS, Azure, GCP, Oracle, IBM, and ensure that you can utilize resources from each of the major cloud providers.
All right, great. Thank you so much for answering all those questions, Peter. It looks like we don't have any further questions unless I see something pop up in the next 20 seconds. So I think we can go ahead and conclude this webinar. Again, if you'd like more information about Rescale, including our upcoming webinars on how to solve complex engineering problems using various software on the Rescale platform, we work with more than 400 softwares. Feel free to visit rescale.com, get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. Thank you again for joining us. Oh, we did get another question. Somebody, okay, I'm going to say your name wrong. I apologize. Bukota asked, can we mix cloud providers? Peter, I'm going to let you take this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So being a multi-cloud platform, that's actually our bread and butter. So on a Rescale platform, as a user, you can choose any of the resources you want, whether doesn't matter which cloud provider it is. If you have application set up already, if you want to run on a different cloud provider, different hardware resource, it's as easy as a click to choosing a different hardware type. And we Rescale take up everything on the back end, that how we integrate with all the different cloud providers. So long story short, most of our customer is actually multi-cloud. They will pick the most efficient resources based on the workload, independent of which cloud provider is actually on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad we squeezed that one in. That's a good question. All right. I think now we can officially conclude. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and stay safe out there. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone.